Welcome to the Indie Author Showcase, the podcast by indie authors for indie authors. I am your host, multi-award winning indie author Chad Robert Morgan, and let's get started. We're going to do something a little bit different today. This is Memorial Day weekend. Traditionally, Memorial Day is to honor our veterans and our military service member that we've lost. And this year I've lost a bit more than a normal year. So I'm going to kind of slightly expand the theme as a general memoriam. Not specifically veterans, although, as we'll get into, most of the people we're talking about are actually veterans that we have lost. Let me start by saying that I am a third generation veteran. My grandfather, on my father's side, died during World War II. He was a B-52 Liberator pilot, and they were going on a bombing run into Germany. The way the story was explained to me, back in those days, they were losing bombers left and right. They were huge targets. Even though they were bristling with guns, they were big, slow, lumbering targets. So losing bombers was a common occurrence. So keeping a squadron together usually meant cobbling from other squadrons that hadn't fared so well. So the squadron had a new addition. We don't know if that contributed to the accident or if it was bad weather. But what happened was they went into a formation, they went into a cloud bank, and at the end of the formation, two of the planes clipped wings, and they both went down. Everyone in my grandfather's plane and half the people in the other plane did not survive. So I want to start Memorial Day weekend honoring and remembering my grandfather, who I never met. He died when my father was about 4, 5, not even that. My grandfather on my mother's side was not her biological grandfather, was her stepfather. He married my grandmother when my mother was about 6 or 7. But my grandfather, who I get my middle name from, was retired Air Force. So he also served as well. And he passed away when I was on deployment on the USS Carl Vinson as part of Operation Southern Watch, which was the Clinton administration's enforcement of the no-fly zone in Iraq that the first Bush had set up. So moving on from that, I want to take a bit of a detour. And I want to talk about something else that is not Memorial Day related, but is, since we're on the theme of loss and remembrance, is kind of important to me. I don't think it's any news at this point that Stephen Colbert has had his final show of late night. And the reason why that hurts isn't so much that Colbert was canceled. I think Colbert was great. I watched this monologue every night. I usually didn't watch the whole show. I usually watched the monologue, maybe the second segment, and then I would probably go to bed unless the guest was like somebody I was really interested in. And in the age of YouTube, anything that I missed, I could watch the next morning on YouTube anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. What kind of bothers me about his cancellation isn't that the show was canceled, but the common wisdom is that it was done for political reasons. Now, the studio, CBS Studios, it says they did it for money because they lost a lot of money, that the show wasn't profitable. But conventional wisdom is Colbert was a very vocal opponent of the Trump administration. Skydance Media wanted to buy Paramount, which owns CBS, which was the parent company of Colbert's show. In order to appease Trump, they killed the show, and then immediately the merger went through. One of the things that I kind of harbor with that is I want to share with you something that I've had for quite a while. I've had it since before he did The Late Show. He used to do this back in his previous show known as The Colbert Report. It started as a quick joke where he said he was going to make some book, some weird sci-fi book. And I mean, it was just a one-off joke. It was a very badly photoshopped image. I mean, it was his face in a space helmet. I mean, it was just a gag, right? It was just a one and done. But the thing spun up to its own thing where they started making these shorts. And so there's and you can find them on YouTube. There's a collection of video shorts of space adventurer Tech Jensen. And this thing actually escalated to the point where we have his own graphic novel, Stephen Colbert's Tech Jensen. And this is, very raunchy, sarcastic sci-fi humor. And as somebody who writes raunchy, sarcastic sci-fi humor, I really appreciated it. My biggest dream was, and it was a dream. It was this was never going to happen. But I literally dreamt about going on the Colbert, the late night show with Colbert, and swapping autographs, having him autograph this very copy, while I gave him an autographed copy of Intergalactic Space Force. As somebody who was responsible for this, I think he would have appreciated it. Well, it wouldn't have been Lord of the Rings, but it would have been the next best thing. But I just, again, wanted to talk about that because, again, Colbert is not dead, but his show is, unfortunately. And I know that's not really fitting in Memorial Day theme in terms of he's not military. I get that, but it is something of a loss, because that dream, at least for the time being, is dead. So I wanted to bring that up just because it was a thing. It's topical, and I just don't think that many people know that this book by Colbert exists. So, and if you do like Tech Jensen, if you are a Stephen Colbert Tech Jensen fan, you might want to check out Intergalactic Space Force and the sequel, Intergalactic Space Force: The Cherub Threat, Book 3. I got the first draft done, and I am trying to get a hold of my editor and say, are you ready to get back to work? Because Book 3 is done. It's ready for an editing pass. So getting back on the Memorial Day theme, about a month ago, I got an old family heirloom into the house. So this bear, we've had this bear for almost 50 years. And if you have read Fear he might look familiar. This book was the inspiration for Javier's bear in my book Fear. This book, this bear belonged to a young girl named Heather. She was the daughter of my father's girlfriend, who tragically fell in the family pool and was not revived. My father kept this bear for us, safely tucked away for decades. And sadly, last month, at the age of about 82, my father passed away. So, with his loss, I asked the family. I said, "There's very few things that I want, but the number one thing was Heather's bear." And like I said, if you've read Fear, you know I never forgot about this guy. So now that he has passed away, stewardship of this poor old guy goes to me. My father did serve in the military. Again, like I said, I'm third generation veteran. My father was a mechanic his entire life, including his military service, and he got in and out right before Vietnam kind of became a thing. So he totally avoided having to go to Vietnam. He just narrowly dodged that bullet. Did his service before people were being sent over there. So in that sense, he was very fortunate. I know my uncle Vincent, my stepmother's brother, who also died a few years ago. He did actually have to go over to Nam and did serve. But again, this is a day of remembering loss, specifically remembering loss of veterans. I know, again, I'm fudging that a bit, but just trying to get on that theme of remembrance. I wanted to mention my dad, and I wanted to mention Heather, which brings us to this week's review. I know we're keeping this really, really short. In keeping with the Memorial Day theme, this week's review is After the Milk and Cookies by my uncle, Russell Morgan, who, tell me if this sounds familiar, sadly passed away last week. My uncle Russ was also a military veteran. He was an Air Force mechanic and was a English and history teacher for 35 years. And after he retired, a friend convinced him that, he's got one good book in him. And in fact, rumor was he was working on a couple more before his health went. And my biggest regret is I've had this book for at least a year. And I did start reading it once I got it. And I wound up putting it aside. And I really wanted to read it and discuss it with my uncle, because this is a very different book than what we normally review on the showcase. Normally what we're reviewing on the showcase, indie authors are writing things that are entertaining And what I mean by that is, there's car chases, there's monsters, um, there's spectacle, right? There are, you know, robots and androids and uh, serial killers and you know heavy metal time travelers, whatever, right? This is not that book. This is a book written by an English teacher. This is got a very kind of Michener feel, who is, I remember somebody my Uncle Russ recommended. It's also, I don't know, a little bit of Steinbecky. The story involves about three different families, and they all start shortly after World War I, and we go through the Great Depression and come out the other side after World War II. The If you can call him a main character, there's really not a single main character, but the closest we get to a main character, he's literally introduced in the beginning of the book, still in the womb. He grows up, he goes to war, he winds up marrying into one of the other families discussed in the book, and they all go living with the third family because, again, everything is kind of intertwined in these small towns. It is a very slice of life. Um, we start with one character. He's a former pilot. He's flying the mail. The ice in his wings freeze over, and he goes down. And he's nursed back to health, and he makes that town his home. We have, again, our second character. He's still in the womb. The mother is pregnant with him. She's a farm girl who's lost her husband, I believe, through the First War, and she's on her own. And she's taken in by an old spinster lady who takes mercy on her, and they form a little family. The old woman who never had kids, the young gal who's pregnant with her first, and then eventually the boy is born. And then our third main character, or our third story thread through this, before they start intertwining, is a very successful businessman who comes in here into this town, starts establishing himself, meets a woman who captivates him. They get married, they have a family. But then, when the Great Depression hits and he loses his business, he goes into a fit of depression, and not only loses his business, but loses his family. And the only thing that keeps him alive was his business ventures in that town that he was in, that he made home. So his big office building in New York was gone, but his local businesses were still thriving. And as the generations go by, these three separate storylines wind up intertwining to the point where they're becoming interdependent. I remember when we were reviewing Doug Brody's book Shelley, and I was talking about how impressed I was with the um, conservation of words, the economy of words that he used. Right, he conveyed an entire chapter's worth of information in detail in less than a paragraph. And my uncle's writing is very, very similar to that, in the sense that There's a few times I was reading it too fast, and every word in this thing counted. And if like you went too fast, because he doesn't really spell everything out. Like there's a point where this one guy from World War I, he's got PTSD, and he shoots himself. And the words are crafted in such a way that if you're just skimming, you wouldn't miss it, because it doesn't literally say, and then he stuck the gun in his mouth and he fired. He's telling you he shot himself. The words are there, but he's assuming you're actually reading the book, which I know that sounds a little weird, but in this day of kind of consumer medium, and how we're two screening things when we're watching TV and everything like that. um you're listening to an audiobook while you're working at the gym, and watching the ticker on CNN kind of thing. He's assuming that he's got your undivided attention, that this is what you're doing and nothing else. Because if you aren't paying full attention, you might get a little lost, because he does have an incredible economy of words. He is explaining things with a very minimal amount of words that, again, I don't know how else to say it. Um, if you read this book, you need to read this book. You need to turn the TV off. And it's not a hard read. In fact, that economy of words made it very, very easy to read. It just, as an English teacher, he's assuming if you're reading a book, you're reading a book. He's not holding your hand. Um, I know that makes it sound like it's hard to read or something like that. It's quite the opposite. It was a very easy read. It was easy to get through this thing. I mean, it's a thick book, but it's still. Um, I went through it in a few days, and and this is what's left of him. So this is my uncle. This is the world he grew up in. The world I think he was nostalgic for. And I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to talk to him about it more when he was here. There was always tomorrow, until we ran out of tomorrows. I guess there's a lesson about procrastination there. I hope you check out his book. I hope you enjoy his book. I hope that you take away from this that we don't. I hope you take away from this that we shouldn't put off until tomorrow what we can do today, as cliche as that is. Because sometimes tomorrow doesn't come. It is May. It is almost the end of May. And this year alone, I've lost my mother, I've lost my father, and now I've lost my uncle. Tomorrow might not come. So don't take it for granted. Enjoy your 3-day weekend. Curl up with a good book. And spend time with the people you care about while you can. It is the fate of all mortals to pass on and be nothing but a memory. on that very depressing note, let me wrap up with a little bit of news. We will be at Monsterpalooza in 1 week. We're 1 week away from Monsterpalooza at Pasadena. We are also, we just signed up for LA Comic Con. This will be our first time going to LA Comic Con. The small press area there was huge. So I'm looking forward to that. My latest book, Intergalactic Space Force Volume 3, as I mentioned before, we have the rough draft done, the first draft done, I should say, not the rough draft, because I've already, technically I think at this point we're at a second draft, because I have polished it quite a few times. And it's ready for my editor. So if my editor is listening, hello. So keep an eye out for ISF3. Hopefully we'll be doing cover reveals and the like pretty shortly. We are having a summer sale on the website. So all of our summer collection is 35% off. And also remember that the shipping is free. So what you charge up on, if the website says it's $50, then it's $50 plus tax. It's not going to suddenly have another $20 in shipping on it. It's all included. And the discount should be automatic. So the sale ends until the end of summer. So go out there and get your beach towels and your swimsuits and the like, and go enjoy the summer. Curl up on the beach with your indie author showcase beach towel and your Intergalactic Space Force swimsuit, and read Intergalactic Space Force 3. That sounds like a good formula for a good summer. Sorry, this one was a little depressing. Again, Memorial Day weekend. I will try to do something. I don't want to promise it, because every time I do, it goes horribly wrong and never happens. But I will try to do something special next week at Monsterpalooza, some kind of live stream. If I do, great. If not, I will see you the first weekend of June. So don't expect a episode this weekend. So see you in a couple weeks. And until then, keep on reading.